I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. I've no glasses.
Okay.
Where's yours?
They're upstairs, yeah. They're upstairs.
That's the place for them. So I can just see my screen because I have that giant writing on it.
Yeah.
That's a blur. Can you read your own notes?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Okay. Because we're going to talk about cocaine.
Yeah.
And obviously the news this week, which was phenomenal. But I'm going to do a little bit of self-promotion here.
Go first.
For a second, right?
Go on.
I have a book due out, as you know all about, because you've heard all about it, in October, in 26th of October, called Cocaine Cowboys. And it's actually all about the arrival of cocaine into Ireland, the kind of the people who were the early, I suppose the early cowboys who saw potential in it.
Yeah.
And it's about an Ireland. It starts at an Ireland of a different time, or so you think, and sort of basically delves into how dark it became, the various characters that made money, some died, whatever. And where we now sit, Ireland, we're punching above our weight when it comes to cocaine. Firstly, on the international stage, with the Kinahans being some of the biggest cocaine suppliers in the world.
Yeah.
And also our usage, we're punching above our weight. We're like one of the biggest users in Europe of cocaine. And you can delve back to all sorts of reasons for that. But give you a little preview, right?
Go for it.
And just see how it relates to this week, because it starts in 1993 and Europe's internal borders are down. And the Gardai have just actually seized a quantity of cannabis, which is coming in along the shoreline, and along with bales of cocaine are beginning to start showing up. The first, I think, on Rosscarbery Beach. But a politician called Jim O'Keefe, who's representing Fine Gael in Cork, gets to his feet in the Dáil, and he's worried. And he says that it's very clear now that the hundreds of miles of rugged coastline in West Cork have become a honeypot for drug smugglers. You had at that time Barry Galvin some months previous going on the Late Late Show and very controversially sort of saying, Ireland is a place where these big drug lords are coming. They're living here. They're living down around Cork. Why are they in these areas? Why are they coming to base themselves in Ireland? And you have really the start of that cocaine, the start of those big seizures, which are all around the coastline. And what do they do? But they get up again in the Dáil and they start looking for the Gardai to be better equipped with binoculars.
Yeah, right.
And do you know what? And this is to sort of fight this growing tide of smugglers who are using Ireland to land cocaine, because they believed then that this could be fought. I mean, when you think of the tsunami that was coming of cocaine, it's a little bit like when you look back on the footage of the people in some of the inner city flat complexes at the beginning of the heroin problem, marching, and they're physically standing to try and stop the trade. Stop the sort of surge of it, but nobody could control it.
No. And of course, like, it's interesting if you're talking about those guys, these expat drug lords or whatever, basing themselves in Cork. One of them would be Johnny Morrissey.
One of them was Johnny Morrissey, yeah.
Who, of course, is currently under investigation in Spain for his role in laundering money for the Kinahan Cartel. So it stretches back. It's things have changed, have they, in terms of scale?
Yeah, they've
and
changed
size?
the scale, and maybe just they haven't. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like I'm saying, okay, obviously the cocaine market has grown, but it's that idea of those sort of early traders were kind of chancers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of these kind of gamblers and people.
Playboy, weren't they kind of playboy types in a way?
They were, and they were sort of coming up with the money. They were doing their deals in Miami.
Yeah.
Which was the playground of the rich and famous. Obviously, Escobar was in the mix and he was sort of flooding that route.
Yeah.
And they were trying every sort of way to to cross the globe with cocaine. But the simplest was, if you look at a map and you draw a straight line from South America across to Europe, you kind of hit the Cork coast, the Wexford coast, the South, and Spain. So Spain and Ireland's coast, and obviously anybody who lives down around Cork, Kerry, any areas will tell you, we know some of the beaches.
Yeah.
But my God.
No, I mean, it's an almost impossible task to have a guard on each
absolutely. And I mean,
pair of binoculars or not.
This week they're asking the public to keep an eye out
for bales of cocaine, which they are. I think they're travelling down.
That's what's happened. 2023. Now tell us about that. That's fun.
Well, no, I did get a few texts from people it was actually in Wexford mostly, because I don't know why, that was where obviously the news first emerged, but there were people floating around the beaches on the off chance of finding an early Christmas present, I suppose.
And there's all sorts of funny things going around WhatsApp as well about, the way the Wexford strawberry farmers sell at those little things on the roadside. Yeah. I got a WhatsApp of somebody basically selling the last bales of cocaine.
Because it did happen in Donegal. Significant numbers of people went up when the last kind of shipment washed up on shore. People were up and floating around the beaches hoping to get lucky.
And maybe they did, because I mean, if you got lucky and you got a bale of cocaine, you're hardly going to ring the Sunday World and say, "Well, I found one. Come and take a photograph of me with it."
Nor is somebody going to bring it to the small claims court for return of their cocaine,
No, indeed.
So, but I suppose if you look at the Irish coast and you look at Colombia, and the reality is it has to come from Colombia or the countries surrounding Colombia in South America. Really, there's only a few ways to get there still. What we've seen this week is basically a ship hired to bring it over. I mean, the other things that have happened in the last couple of decades have been where cocaine shipments will be hidden amongst regular cargo.
Largely bananas.
Legitimate cargo.
Yeah.
So they'd be hidden within that and brought to a port in Europe. And that was obviously a route that the Kinahans used a lot of the time. The other route is to hire a ship, not bring anything else, and solely do it for this purpose. And other than that, really, you're talking about what they call mule smuggling on planes, where people, or through the postal system, and you're really talking quite small scale. I mean, there's money to be made, but that there really are options. So we've seen that over maybe the last 20 years. There's been a number of really large hauls discovered on these kind of specially purposed boats, like there was obviously the one in Dunlock Bay, and there was it Dancing with Waves? Was Dances with Waves?
Yeah.
So those are other big hauls, and this latest one is the same thing. The values, I mean, they're suggesting now 500 million. Initially, the figure given out was 157 million pounds worth. That's based on 2.2 tons, and that's basically
is 2,000 kilos or thereabouts. Is that right? 2,200 kilos.
Yeah, 2.2 tons, so 2,200.
60 euro a gram.
Yeah, but obviously the value becomes inflated when they look at the purity of it, and then obviously most cocaine in sold on the streets of Ireland is I can't remember the figure, but it's
50 or 60 euro a gram.
Yeah, but it's also the purity could be 20-30%, and that's how the value goes up. I mean,
and also let's just go back and what happened in this case. This ship, this mothership, left Venezuela.
Yes,
which is one of the countries where cocaine is produced.
Yeah, it was a Venezuelan registered ship. It left
Caraco, didn't it?
Caraco, which is a kind of a Dutch protectorate, isn't it? Just off the coast of Colombia. That would be a somewhere where these shipments are put on board reasonably. Then it left that port. It seems to have stopped at a couple of places, including the Canary Islands. It's been registered. The owner of the ship seems to be registered in China. So it seems to have taken a journey.
I'm listening to you. Sorry, I was actually just looking up Caraco because that's first time I've properly applied myself to that. Yeah, it's a. You're right.
Yeah.
surprisingly enough. It's a Dutch Caribbean island known for its beaches tucked into coves and its expansive coral reefs, which rich with marine life.
Yeah.
The capital, Williamstad, has pastel-coloured colonial architecture, floating Queen Emma Bridge and the sand-floored 17th century synagogue. It's also a gateway to western beaches like Blue Bay, a popular diving site.
Yeah,
so you can imagine the kind of lifestyle there is out there in Krakow.
Exactly. And so, somebody has bought this ship. I think they had a value of it at 9.5 million. So that's the initial investment. The ownership, it's registered in these various places. So there will be some sort of paper trail. But I think even now the investigators are saying that paper trail is going to ultimately lead nowhere. So the ship leaves. It seems to have stopped at various points, stalled for periods of time. It's not clear if it was loaded while at sea, but it seems one of the most likely. As it left South America, it seems to have stalled for a period of time.
In particular, I think it was spent some period of time around the Canary Islands.
But that was, after stalling in the initial international waters, it then went to the Canary Islands and seemed to have stayed there for a couple of weeks. And obviously, the clear suspicion would be that there was a drop off at that point. And then it headed on up the coast of France, possibly coming close to Spain. But I think there is another suggestion that there may have been another drop off point somewhere in France. What it seems to be, rather than the ship, the main ship docking, there's a belief that trawlers are sent out to collect a portion of the shipment, and then it ends up in Cork. And obviously,
which of course will again sort of it's less risky for that to happen, for the smaller trawlers to go out and to meet the bigger boats.
Yeah.
And for sometimes even the cocaine to be picked up by the bigger boats, the motherships not on port. Like in ports are really the high risk points for any ship to land, because their activities, where they're from, they kind of have to come in, say who they are, tell the port authorities why they're landing, where they've come from. Sometimes they have to show their ship's logs, and often they'll have to be boarded by the local authorities or the customs. So it's a high risk. Coming into land is high risk. So for this boat, and for whoever owns the actual cargo on this, be it worth 500 million or a billion, they are happier once that starts breaking down and starts being put onto smaller ships.
Yeah. And so that seems to be the plan. Obviously, it all went awry for various things when it got to the coast of Ireland. Certainly, it seems the suspicion is there was a trawler in Wexford was due to go out. It's not fully clear exactly what happened, but ultimately
There's two people before the courts, so we have to be a little bit careful.
Ultimately that trawler ran aground, and that's still being rescued. Now, it's clear there was some intelligence around the movements of the mothership, that the trawler running aground wasn't the thing that sparked the investigation. There obviously was intelligence going on before. And the Navy went out and went to intercept the ship. The ship tried to speed up and leave the Irish waters. They were fired upon by the Navy, which is a very rare occurrence, it has to be said. And then the Army Ranger Wing boarded the ship. 2.2 tons worth of cocaine were found in a lifeboat, basically. And there seems to have been some attempt to dispose of that just as they were being boarded. Reports that they were attempting to set it alight. So it's a major, major haul. And we're seeing now, the Guards have done a number of interviews. Obviously, other people who were involved in the investigation have also spoken about it. The international police forces, but it looks like that haul can be traced directly to the Gulf cartel. The Gulf clan cartel in Colombia seems to be
where it's originating from. And the suspicion of who owned such a big cargo, who was able to purchase it, is not very satisfactory for us, okay?
No.
While there is an investigation into whether or not the Kinahans had any overarching involvement in this, and it is suspected that they did.
Yeah.
And the reason is because they're big enough still. That's how big they'd got, that they are kind of like bringing together cartels from all sorts of regions.
Yeah.
Now, the suspicion in regards to this is that they could have either financed it or certainly made the connections between possibly Iranian, Ukrainian, Eastern European and British drug gangs in order to make this deal.
I think what's happened, like with the Colombian cartels in recent times, although back in the days of Pablo Escobar, they were involved in every single level of the drugs trade. So Pablo Escobar cultivated the cocaine in the jungle, processed it, collected it, and then delivered it to the US, and then had his own agent selling it in the US as well and distributing it. But I think in recent times, the Colombian cartels really have cut back on that bit of it. So the European super cartel and some of the other Eastern European drugs gangs, they became very much more involved in the logistics of moving it once they bought it off the Colombian cartels in South America. So the Colombian cartels wouldn't necessarily hire the people now, and it seems that they would at times as well. So that's what they will look into was what was the involvement of those. And if you remember 2019, there was the MSC Guyane, which was also had a Kinahan link, and that was £1 billion worth of cocaine was found on a ship in Philadelphia that was destined for Europe. And if you look back, that went through courts. There's a number of people convicted, long, complicated cases.
Yeah, and a lot of the people convicted, and as is often the case in this, I'm not talking about this particular case or anybody before the courts, but a lot of the people, they've really quite interesting stories, but they're not drugs masterminds. Any of the people on these ships, usually a lot of the crew firstly don't know what's on board, right? It's hidden. Some of the crew will have to know because they either have to meet up or make sure that the ship meets these smaller trawlers and follows its course. But a lot of them tend to have sort of been found out in those Caribbean islands and in that kind of lifestyle, that marine lifestyle, maybe you'd call it. They're running private charter yachts. They maybe have some skills at sea. They maybe, some of them, and it was only that I was researching for the book that I came up with some of these stories. Some of them had maybe owned private charter boats themselves, and there might have been a storm or a hurricane. They'd no insurance and their boat was gone. So they had this kind of hard luck story. And then they're approached because the players from both Europe and the cartels in the US are circulating in these areas and they're finding these people, and they're people living slightly alternative lifestyles. They're offering them sometimes $500,000 to transport the cocaine across the Atlantic with clear indications of where they're to stop and very clear instructions of who they're to give the stuff to. And obviously they make the trip, it's successful, and they get 500,000 in their pocket, and that gets them out of trouble. Maybe gets them into even more trouble because it's very tempting to go again. But they're all these sort of collection of people. There's one story, and I won't spend too long, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. But you're back in 1996, and a ship called the Sea Mist gets into trouble, actually, in weather, because of weather off the coast of Ireland. And it has to come in and ship in, it has to kind of come in looking for safety in Kinsale Harbour. But it was actually guided in by fishermen. They were saving these people. They hadn't got the right flag raised on the boat. The two crewmen were behaving so suspiciously that the fishermen who brought them in sort of said to the guards, these guys are a bit odd, I don't know what's on the boat. They went onto the boat and all of a sudden they find cocaine that they initially conservatively estimated was worth 40 million. It went up and down actually in value until eventually they settled on about 100 million. At one point actually, one of the tabloid papers had a headline saying it was a 500 million whole pound that was back then. Huge. Nonetheless, it was a huge amount of cocaine. But the guy behind it all, because this is a story that has kind of really, come to its end. It's unravelled. It did unravel before the courts with a very interesting tale of all the people who were on the boat and where it was due to go. But the guy behind it was a fella called Brian Wright, and he was known as the milkman because he always delivered. He was actually born in Cork, family of 12. They moved to the UK, and he was reared in Kilburn in grinding poverty. A flash kind of a guy. He was always on the race courses. earned a bit of money through gambling and always saw opportunities. And of course, cocaine was the big opportunity for him. But he, unknown to himself, his son had actually been collated out on a Caribbean island about a month before. The weather off Ireland's southeast coast kind of served him badly. But that guy basically was shipping that kind of amount of coke into the UK at that stage every couple of months.
Yeah.
I mean, he was worth a fortune. Now, his organisation was targeted and taken down. He initially escaped, went to live in northern Cyprus, out of reach from the law, and eventually came back and served time in prison, and has only recently been released from jail, claiming poverty.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I mean, they're
gone full circle.
Yeah, they are great stories, and you can see in the MS Guyane, you see a collection of kind of logistical specialists, really. Most of them from Eastern Europe, who specialised in the movement of cocaine, not in the production of it and not in the ultimate selling of it when it landed, but just in the logistical moving of it across the ocean. Obviously, you say it's unsatisfying for us because we'd like to say, yeah, Daniel made a call and, that type of story.
Well, you'd also kind of like the idea that it was all his.
Yes.
And all of a sudden he was destroyed and that was the end of it, and the Kinahans were gone broke.
But it's not that type of story, really.
It doesn't work like that.
Because,
but who's going to take the hit on the money?
Well, you see...
It'll be the buyers, I imagine, because sometimes you see situations where the Colombians or the Venezuelans will guarantee delivery through a port, but usually if they have their own people, and that has usually happened and has been seen happening through EncroChat in Rotterdam and Antwerp, but where they have their own operation. Now, it costs a lot of money to get that guarantee through the port all the way, but if there's a kind of a loss at sea or on the way into Europe, it'll hit the other side. Whereas most of the deal's done.
Yeah.
The deal is done and you get paid up out in South America or Central America. You collect it, and if you lose it, it's on you.
But you pay a lot less at source.
Yes, of course, they do. They do.
So, I mean, how do they mitigate the risk then, really, isn't it? And I mean, that's what partly drove the alliance that caused the super cartel, because you're getting instead of one of those gangs paying 20, 30 million for this shipment, what you get is a collection of them all pay 2 million. If it gets caught, if something goes wrong, they're definitely out of pocket, but they're not utterly destroyed by a single seizure. And so, look, all of the indications are that's what the Gardai believed was the case here, that you will have multiple gangs from across Europe, possibly even multiple gangs within Ireland, who will all maybe pay up in advance and get a cut of it, and that therefore it won't destroy one of them in particular if it goes down, though it's obviously going to be, people are going to be losing a huge amount of money. And certainly what we've seen with some of these other shipments and the Kinahans is the belief is that it's them that have established those relationships with the South American cartels, isn't it, in Colombia?
Well, I mean, they'll hold that power with that. Now, I suppose as well, it's interesting you talk about mitigating the risk and all the rest of it. The likes of the Kinahans, we know, are a murderous cartel.
Yeah.
And, we have sensed some of what they're capable of here in this country. But, I mean, a lot of stuff has gone on throughout Europe. If the collection of cartels behind this shipment are who the Gardai and officers of Europol believe they are, each are a very dangerous mob which rule with fear and with threats. And you can be guaranteed that in cases like this, the pressure of the shipment coming lays on those people who take that money in the first place to transport it.
Yeah.
So all that pressure comes down. They're being warned that if they don't land this stuff, they're going to be killed. They're going to be held in the debt for it. So that's the way they operate.
Yeah.
But you've other people especially cocaine seems to draw this cross-section of society, it always has, in its use, plus in the kind of the business behind it. I mean, we had, of course, Philip Barron,
Yeah.
the Baron of Straffan, as he was known. And he was an interesting character. Not all that long ago, he's been released from prison in the UK. And he was part of a kind of a gentleman grouping of cocaine dealers who were big cocaine dealers. And what they did was they approached it like any other business. If you owned a supermarket, you're going to have losses through theft, breakages, etc. They had profit and loss sheets basically on their business. And they accepted that if they lost a shipment, they accepted it as a loss. Because the profits were always greater. So they took a very business approach to it. And they literally, so the likes of if they lost that consignment that, whoever was behind this week, they would just dust themselves down and get on with the next one, knowing that you can afford to lose one. Your problem comes when you're hit again and again and again. And when you, as a kind of a businessman, in that secret underworld, become the target of a multi-pronged approach to take you down.
And then, of course, you see, it's the paranoia sets in, doesn't it? Because, as I said, the stuff went wrong in Wexford, but that's not, the guards seem to have known this was coming anyway. So how do they know? I mean, we don't know, but there's only a couple of ways. There's either a human source or a technological source. So what happens is then if there's multiple seizures in various places, it nearly always ends up in murder because people become paranoid, believe there's informers, all of that pressure comes on. And we've seen that again and again with the Kinahan cartel. During the times in which there have been major seizures, there's been this, this paranoia, this putting pressure on people, and ultimately it's ended up in a load of shootings of various types, including, of course, the shooting at Gary Hutch, which was driven by that same process, this of looking for an informer in their ranks and blame being spread around.
And funny enough, the courts often deal quite humanely. Certainly in this country, I've seen it, and sometimes in the UK, can deal quite humanely by these people who are part of they're just the worker bees, aren't they? The guys who are on the ships. And often they do have stories that are quite... Like sometimes, certainly in the case of the MSC Guyane, which we can talk about, there was a lot of people recruited in the Balkans to go and, work on the crew of that ship. And they really were not powerful.
No. I see, because
drug bosses, you know what I mean?
No.
They were impoverished kind of chancers who saw that they'd do this job and maybe it would change their lives.
Yeah, and because of course they are, they have to, it's still complicated to pilot a ship across the Atlantic. Land things, meet trawlers, register ships, all of that sort of stuff takes a certain skill. And so the drugs cartels, they need professional people to do it, And who are they going to get except for people that are really hard up on their luck or people...
Or greedy, because there's been plenty of others that have really shown up in that whole mix that shouldn't be there. People sometimes, professionals, I mean...
Living on the edge, though, a bit, for one reason or another. And, so, this is it. They can't just rely on their... you can't get a few guys out of the north inner city to go and pilot a ship across the Atlantic, whether they're willing to or not. And in fact, a lot of the discovery of these seizures has come really from not having people just being professional enough.
But you know what I'd say as well, while some of them, I mean, obviously the skippers that's in these boats have to know and they have to have licenses and stuff. But a lot of people chance their arm in very dangerous waters. I mean, it does appear to be extremely dangerous what they're being asked to do. And that's because of the transfer of these bales, these very heavy bales from these big motherships onto the smaller fishing vessels. They're in the dark usually because they don't want to be doing this in daylight for obvious reasons. But they're expected to pilot a ship out into those very dark, treacherous waters to meet another ship and then physically transfer a load on board. I mean, you recall the famous case down in Cork when the bales and the men floated in after they put the wrong they put the diesel in the petrol engines or vice versa, whichever it was. And they all ended up like in the sea, in the drink, along with the bales of cocaine. I mean, there's been so many incredible stories and so many people that have kind of been part of all this that have been really lucky to have survived.
Yeah.
I mean, they're out in the high seas clinging to a bale of cocaine.
Yeah.
They must wrap them really well.
They do. They vacuum pack them, I think, or whatever it is. Because actually, there was in one of the papers, I can't remember which one, describing how they basically made them waterproof. You know, and obviously,
so if they do float into the beaches,
well, they float into the beaches and they're usable.
They're usable.
Yeah.
So what, like?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, like the Donegal. Like, remember, it's only a few months ago. Big loads of cocaine floated into a beach in Donegal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
And they never found that mothership.
They never found that mothership or traced anything, anybody on any level to do with that.
Exactly.
So, and then all of that cocaine, which I thought was interesting as well. I mean, it's gone up, you know, $500 million now or whatever figure. All of that had to be transported then from the coast of Cork, all the way up to Dublin. Do you know that somebody drove up all of that cocaine up?
What do you mean when they?
No, like it was brought to Dublin this week.
Yeah.
I think it was displayed, wasn't it?
And why is that fascinating?
Well, it's somebody is driving, you know, some guard in the back has half. I presume it's a bit more complicated than that. You take a few of them bales up, you know.
Into the back.
Get your man on the Gardai bike. He can bring up one.
I was actually doing an interview. And
then what did they do?
Wednesday.
They burn it, do they?
That's exactly what I'm about to say to you. So there we were in the Sugar Club getting ready for our show on Wednesday evening, and everybody's doing sound checks. And RTE decide they're going to do an interview. I said to him, I don't know what the place will be like, but I will talk to you. Now, I mean, anyway, we did the interview with them. But one of the questions that somebody sent in was, can this cocaine be used for anything in the pharmaceutical industry? And of course, I think I was muted because somebody was doing a bloody sound check for the show at the time. But all I could think of was, is that not part of this story?
Yeah.
And it's part of what lies at the heart of this story. No, it can't, because it has no other use other than to be a recreational drug that you take when you're out enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
And it has to be destroyed. It has to be burnt. Like, can you imagine that bonfire? I remember.
I presume now it's not just in the back of the Phoenix Park.
No.
Somebody
it has to be
spraying a bit of barbecue.
I don't know where, to be honest with you. It was a good question in one way because, where do they go and incinerate it safely? I'm sure there's a place somewhere.
Well, I
probably send it back to China.
I actually asked once the press office, could we come along and watch an incineration? But I can't remember what happened, but they didn't say yes.
You should have asked, could you come along and watch the cocaine being driven
what I want,
up? Could you strap yourself in beside it in the back of the car? I can't believe that was your thought process.
Well, I just thought, how did they get it up? I presume they put it. Actually, I'll tell you this story now. And this is what you missed. Because you know the way I slag you about your numbers all the time.
Yeah.
So we had the initial stories where, the figures in most of the papers are it's over £100 million worth of cocaine. And, I wrote up a story the morning saying, and, giving a more exact figure. And delighted with myself, up before any others, £156 million worth of cocaine is the final figure. And then the guards did a press conference.
Yeah.
And what did they say? 157.
So you really screwed up.
Just one million.
I know, 1 million out, for God's sake.
And it had to be,
That's like, if you were on a game show and they asked you to guess that, you would have been like, everybody would have been impressed by that.
Well, it's still 1 million out. What's 1 million? £1 million pounds? Pounds worth of cocaine.
But look, cocaine is a fascinating topic. It remains that way. How it's transported, how it's used.
Yeah. It's the scale of money involved, and you can see that.
The scale of the money involved transporting this product across the world, the amount of money involved in the policing of that transporting of the product around the world, the amount of people that will be, having sleepless nights because of this seizure. And it won't be the guys with the money, the guys on the top. Now, what I was saying to you earlier there about, and we were having a discussion about this during the week, is that sort of relentless targeting is the problem. So if Kinahans put up some money on this one and they lost, 2 million or whatever it was in this 10 million, let's say, is probably more reasonable. That would mean nothing to them. They could do a Philip Barron on it and they could just put it on their losses sheet and get on with it and know that it'll be profit for the next 8 months. But their problem ultimately is that there has been this sustained focus on them. And they have lost hundreds of millions rather than tens in various places. They are so sort of leaky as an organization now that so much information is coming out from there and from their every move that they're also toxic for other people to work with.
And actually what somebody did say to me, a retired guard, he said to me, the reason that they became so successful was because they were dealing with these South Americans and the Kinahans' word was rock solid. They always paid up. They didn't have those leaks and they were so willing to deal with them because they were totally trustworthy. Now, if you have all of these seizures going on and they're in the papers and the DEA are sanctioning them, eventually they do become toxic and people wonder, is that how? Like, how was that?
On an international level,
on an
perhaps
international
they were
level.
trustworthy. I don't think they have that reputation, even within their own ranks, on a personal level.
No, I think, but what he was saying to me was they paid those South Americans. They didn't mess them around. They made sure whatever they did with their own people, they paid. They were kept totally solid with them. They were happy to deal with them. But I don't think that's the case now.
Do you know who one of the first cocaine cowboys before the courts in this country convicted because of attempts to traffic cocaine was?
Well, I always remember Eamon Kelly. Is that? Yeah.
Eamon Kelly.
Eamon Kelly.
So Eamon Kelly, who was murdered in 2012 outside his own home. A man on the bus pass, at least by then. He was well in his late 50s, maybe. Was he early 60s?
No, he was early 60s at least.
Yeah. So he was, had a sort of paramilitary background.
Well, I mean, I've done a podcast actually with Brian Hanley, who's a professor at Trinity, and he's spoken about Eamon Kelly.
What does he say about him?
Well, he says that Eamon Kelly was one of the guys that were kind of mentored by IRA figures in Dublin when they wanted to have a bit of separation from bank robbing, basically. And he was part of a group of people who were mentored into that business by the official IRA. They kind of would give him information, give him weapons. And he stayed, that was in the late 60s. And obviously was, stayed in criminality the whole way through. And when the drug strike came, he got into it,
And he, of course, ended up mentoring people himself. But his just an interesting little tale, I suppose, about and perhaps to raise funds for himself, or I mean, the IRA wouldn't have liked to have been seen anyway connected with the drugs trade all the way back in.
I don't think it was at that stage.
But he basically, in the early 90s, saw an opportunity for himself. And that was, there was an Irish man based out in Miami who had a history actually of working in the weapons trade in Israel. An interesting character, but he was somebody who was based in Miami. Unknown to Eamon Kelly, he appears to have, through his connections to the weapon trade, known US authorities and was suspected of kind of working as a little bit of an agent for the DEA because they were trying to delve into Escobar's network, and Miami was the center of everything then. But our boy Kelly goes out and he does a deal and he decides that they're going to bring some cocaine in on a human mule. Right? Who was a woman. A lot of immigrants were living in the Miami area and were willing, had dreams of maybe setting up a business for themselves or something, but had no way of getting that small sort of nest egg to start themselves off with. So Kelly went out and met this sort of larger than life Irish guy in Miami, and he had connections in weapons. And it was suspected that this guy had actually been working with the DEA as a kind of a double agent, a mole. They were looking to get into the Escobar network. They were concerned about the amount of cocaine flooding into the US. And they had many people working kind of half, gangster types working and working for them. But anyway, Kelly did his deal, and in the September of 1992, this Irishman and a woman flew into Dublin. Kelly met them at the airport and they drove out to Jury's Hotel, where she booked into a hotel room. Now, at that time, Martin Callanan who would later become the Commissioner of An Garda Síochána, he was in charge of this drug team who had focused on Kelly. They really wanted Kelly because he was a paramilitary more than anything. And obviously they had been working on intelligence, presumably we can say from the US, that he had done this deal and this cocaine was coming in. So they pounced basically, and they discovered that this woman had brought it in. She was kind of a large lady, and she had put the cocaine into the folds of the skin on her belly.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so that is quite useful. Like,
Those circumstances.
Particularly wants it. But so anyway, Kelly and his friend were picked up along with her, and actually the Irish guy ended up leaving the country and not coming back for many years, and Kelly faced the courts on his own. Now, he was convicted and sentenced to 14 years, which was an incredible time.
Yeah.
But he was sort of, an example really back then as somebody who was entrepreneurial enough. For somebody from that paramilitary background, like, they were very intelligent, very well-educated guys. They were a little bit like the criminals that Eamon talks about now, who don't see borders, who don't see the world as being a frightening place, who are willing to go wherever they need to.
And of course, if you look back on then, at that time, the 90s, like, cocaine was more expensive in Ireland than it is now. So I think cocaine was selling for something like £80 a gram at that stage. And it's now...
And its purity might have been 20%.
Well, it might, but if it's one of the few things, like if you look back on how much a pint cost or something back then, it's escalated and escalated. But cocaine is coming down. Cocaine is cheaper now than it was back then. And it just shows you how the drugs trade is just so different than everything else,
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and that's because it's operating in, I suppose, a lawless society where people are setting the price, they're fixing the price. I mean, they say now that the Albanians are fixing the price.
Yeah.
They're coming in with it cheaper, and they're really moving in on the sort of, I mean, I think we've seen evidence that there's, an Albanian presence here.
Yeah.
Certainly down in the Costa del Sol, they have really moved in, and others are, I don't know, they seem to be more afraid of them than they are.
Yeah, they seem to be more afraid of them, and they seem to be, again, very adept at the logistical part of the operation. So that's become a big thing for those groups, that they have the people and the expertise to move the drugs around the place. That they're not limited by operating in a single country. So there will be
planes, trains, and automobiles, eh?
Yeah,
I mean,
planes,
there was planes recently as well coming in with smaller amounts and dropping loads.
There was, and look, and we can talk about the dismantlement of the Kinahan cartel. There's no doubt something else is coming, and there's different ways, and things change, and certain routes get shut down, but it's the level of inventiveness is just going to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll leave it at that for this week, and we'll be back. We have to put up so we did record the birthday party show we did. I'm not sure how crimey it is it? Well, it is a bit, I suppose.
I suppose so.
Yeah. You committed a few crimes in it.
Yeah, well, there's.
I mean, I think visually, you always say that I'm very aware of our YouTube followers.
Yeah.
But I do think anybody who will listen to the forthcoming Sunday World 50th Birthday Celebration podcast has to go visual on this. You have to go on YouTube because we're running the photographs, yeah?
I suppose we are we? Yeah.
Do you want to tell...
Not really.
Do you want to tell anybody what it...
No, I'm not going to tell, but there is a picture of me pointing at a glory hole. And we'll just leave it at that, will we?
We'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much, Nicola.
Bye for this week.